Shadowkeep will be 3 years old in October. Is it worth buying in 2022? We know now that Shadowkeep isn't going to be vaulted, so that is a big positive in its favor. The only question is whether you are interested in the content that Shadowkeep offers. There are some good parts to it, and I'll try to give you a breakdown of the key content that comes with this expansion. If you just want my one-sentence opinion, wait for a sale before buying. Alright, let's get into it, and I'll start with the campaign. The Shadowkeep campaign opens with Eris Morn discovering a buried pyramid ship on the moon and inadvertently releasing an army of nightmares. Our guardian is tasked with uncovering the secrets of the pyramid ship. Along the way, you'll try to contain some of the nightmares which have taken the form of enemies from our past. There isn't much more to add to that description as it is a very short and simple campaign. Most of your time is spent acquiring Dreambane armor, which is required before you can complete the final mission. While the campaign does introduce important story elements that are still relevant today, the whole thing ends rather abruptly in my opinion. It's just, hey, so we found this thing and encountered these beings, but there's other things to do right now, so we'll get back to that later, alright? The campaign will take you less than 2 hours to complete. You'll blow through the missions with no trouble at all. That's just the nature of power creep. Destiny 2's sandbox was very different 3 years ago. Now let's talk about strikes, or just one strike. Shadowkeep only included one new strike, and that is the Scarlet Keep. If you've spent any time in the Vanguard Ops playlist, you've probably run this strike many times. You don't actually have to own the DLC to play the strike in the Vanguard Ops playlist. The only thing you gain from owning the DLC is the ability to run the Nightfall version of the strike. For reference, Nightfalls are more difficult versions of strikes with better rewards. Nightfalls work on a weekly rotation schedule. This week may be the Arms Dealer and next week may be the Scarlet Keep. Some of the Nightfalls are free for all players, whereas others require the corresponding DLC. If you enjoy grinding in-game content like Nightfalls, then you may want to consider Shadowkeep so that you aren't locked out of the weekly Nightfall whenever the Scarlet Keep comes up in rotation. While Shadowkeep didn't add many strikes, it did add nightmare hunts. Hunts are basically the same thing as strikes, except they have a Shadowkeep theme. It's the exact same formula, flying into an activity, running through mobs of enemies, then fighting a boss at the end. And just like with Nightfalls, there are difficulty modifiers for the nightmare hunts. Unlike Nightfalls, you don't get amazing loot for completing a master nightmare hunt. There really isn't much reason to run nightmare hunts unless you're going for the Shadowkeep title. You might as well run through each one once just to check it out, but there isn't much here to keep you coming back for more. Shadowkeep introduced the second dungeon into the world of Destiny 2, and it is named the Pit of Heresy. Dungeons are designed to be mini raids. You get a group of 3 people together and you tackle challenging enemies and puzzles. Dungeons and raids are my favorite things about Destiny 2, and Pit of Heresy does not disappoint. Playing through it today isn't nearly as challenging as when it was first released, but it's still a fun activity. If you want to get started soloing dungeons, Pit of Heresy is a great starting point. I'd rate it as the easiest dungeon to solo. This dungeon takes place deep within the moon. It isn't nearly as pretty as the Shattered Throne, as the Hive don't seem to care too much about aesthetics. You'll use Hive swords to cut through your enemies, crawl through tunnels to avoid invulnerable ogres, navigate a trolly obstacle course, and then stop a giant knight named Zolmak. If I were to give Pit of Heresy a rating, I'd go with an 8 out of 10. It's not my favorite dungeon, but it still offers a ton of fun, and I think it is worth your time. The next step after dungeons are raids, and Shadowkeep includes one raid, and is the Garden of Salvation, also known as the Vault of Grass. You'll enter the raid via a portal on the moon, and it takes you to the Black Garden. The name is very ominous, but it's actually a very beautiful setting. You'll battle through an army of Vex until you finally bring down the Sanctified Mind. The core mechanic of this raid revolves around creating a chain between 2 points. It's a little wonky, but works for the most part. I've seen a lot of people online complaining about the tether mechanic on the final boss. I've not run into too many issues with it personally. The final boss encounter is actually my favorite encounter in the whole raid. Everyone has to be on their toes and it can get a little hectic. The rest of the raid is kind of boring in my opinion. I'll be honest, Garden of Salvation is my least favorite raid in the game right now. It's hard for me to pinpoint what exactly I don't like about it. It just doesn't do it for me. Having said that, if you like raiding, you should definitely give it a shot. Also, there's a really good exotic tied to the raid named Divinity. This is a trace rifle that debuffs enemies. If you've watched anyone stream in-game content, you've probably seen Divinity. There's a quest and a series of puzzles within the raid that have to be completed. Fortunately, Divinity is not a random drop after completing the raid. Once you finish the quest, you get it. It's almost like Bungie thought people wouldn't want to run this raid over and over again chasing an exotic. I'm probably being too harsh, so I'll just move on to the Shadowkeep exotics. From the exotic kiosk at the tower, you can purchase Leviathan's Breath. This is a heavy combat bow. Yeah, a heavy combat bow. It does stun unstoppable champions, so at least it's got that going for it. Ariana's Vow. This is a special hand cannon. It pops barriers and packs a wallop. An excellent choice. Bastion. This is a kinetic fusion rifle. It fires 3 slugs and you will likely get backed for using it in PvP. Symmetry. This automatic scout rifle is a fun option to use. It has an alternate fire mode that tracks targets. Devil's Ruin. I'm not a fan of sidearms, but I do love Devil's Ruin. Turns the sidearm into a laser and it stuns unstoppable champions. Tommy's Matchbook. This auto rifle damages you, but it also increases the damage dealt. I was killed by it once in PvP. Respect to that guy. The Fourth Horseman. An automatic shotgun that quickly pumps out massive damage. Surprisingly effective considering it uses special ammo. Wither Horde. This is the grenade launcher to rule them all. Drops a damage dealing patch on the ground. You can also hit targets directly to cause tick damage. The go-to option for soloing in-game content. Ruinous Effigy. This is a trace rifle with a fun perk. When you kill an enemy, they turn into a ball that you can carry with you and create a damaging area. You can also slam it onto enemies for massive damage. Traveler's Chosen. This sidearm will build stacks of gathering light from each kill. Consume the stacks and it refreshes your ability energy. The 3 quest-related exotics for Shadowkeep are Divinity, which is obtained via the Garden of Salvation raid. This debuffs enemies and creates a big bubble that acts like a crit spot for that enemy. Has become a staple for raid teams. Xenophage, which is obtained via the Pit of Heresy Dungeon. This heavy machine gun fires slowly and hits like a truck. Pairs beautifully with Actium War Rig. Deathbringer, which is obtained via a questline that begins after the campaign is completed. This rocket launcher shoots a ball that splits into mini balls when you release the trigger. The balls track enemies below and can clear an area very effectively. Monte Carlo may be available with Shadowkeep as a random drop, but I couldn't determine this for sure. This auto rifle will recharge your melee by damaging enemies with it. As with the other DLC, there is exotic armor tied to Shadowkeep. I'm going to skip over the armor in this video. The issue I have is that Bungie recently gave away 2 of the 3 Shadowkeep exotic armor pieces for free to all players. Based on this, I have no idea on whether you actually need to own the DLC to have the armor drop now. I assume this fuzziness is why they don't have formal lists of what gear comes with the DLC purchases. It's very confusing. Let's talk about something else. After completing the campaign, you'll be able to access the Lectern of Enchantment. This allows you to farm certain weapons or armor pieces. This sounds nice in theory, but the gear really needs an update. The armor is pretty much useless unless your goal is to make nightmare hunts easier. There are also some unique moon weapons that can be farmed here. All of the weapons are decent with no real standout options. One big issue is that the newer weapons have an additional perk column giving them an advantage over older gear like what you get on the moon. Since Bungie is keeping Shadowkeep around, I'm hoping they show some love to the moon weapons. In the meantime, there isn't much to chase here. Just keep it in mind in case the perk pools get updated. Well, there you have it. That's Shadowkeep. As I stated in the intro, you'll probably want to wait on a sale for this one. That's the general rule of thumb with the older content. It's hit or miss on whether Bungie will refresh the gear, so you have to make your decision based on what is currently available. Some of the exotics are great. There's also the dungeon in the raid. I've seen Shadowkeep drop to $10 before, and I think you'll see that price point several times before the end of 2022. The regular price is $24.99, which is just way too much in my opinion. That's all I've got to say about it. Hopefully this video helped you understand what you get with Shadowkeep. Take care.